Good evening, everybody. Do you have this? Hey, Dana, do you have the sign up or is it still there? I have it. Okay. If there's anybody who wants to speak tonight, Dana has the sign up for that. I'll give you a second here before we do the pledge. If you'd like to sign up to speak, it's over here by Dana. All right, then I will call this meeting to order. Please rise for the pledge. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we have just one person signed up for Citizens Forum.
Yep, Brad Martin.
Hello, I'm Brad Martin.
Can you just state your address for us, please?
Do I need to go closer to everyone?
A little bit.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Come on up.
My name is Brad Martin. My address is 4115 Brown County Line Road, Pulaski. I just speaking tonight. I have two daughters that go to school here at Sunnyside. It has brought to some of our attention that the school plans on taking down a playground that the 4Kers and the kindergartners use. I don't know if it was part of the construction plan. I didn't dive too deep into looking into that. But I know that the kids still get gotten a lot of use out of it, and I know some teachers in those grade levels were concerned that that's being taken down. And since it was paid for by the PTO, majority of it was paid by the PTO to put that up. I know, so I guess some answers or maybe why it's if there's a reason for it or whatnot, but just sort of want to get some answers on why that's being taken down. That's all I got.
Okay, thank you, Brad.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
All right, then we're going to move right into our one and only agenda item tonight.
All right. Can you hear us, or do you want us to pass the mic around?
I think we're good. How about everybody else, though? You're speaking at us. Can you guys all hear okay back there? Good? Yeah? No? Okay, maybe microphone then.
Okay. Now, can you hear me better? Okay, so we have a group tonight, and if you remember, we started off in August after our 3D vision time, or actually I think it was the first meeting in September, and we started to walk through kind of our 3D vision time and the work that our teachers did and our guiding coalitions at our summer retreat in August, digging into data. And then kind of at that meeting, we laid out what would happen. So once the state data was unembargoed, then we were able to bring that information to you. And so this is the first of the 2 nights where we'll share the data. And so we have local and we have state assessment data that a team will do. And so we split these up, otherwise you'd probably be here until 10 o'clock at night and you'd be in data overload. And so we'll do math, science, and the 4 C's tonight. And so this is kind of the group, the team that will be helping to share that data on the elementary, middle school, and high school basis. So, and then the next meeting, we'll have a different team or some of the same members who will focus on our English language arts, our math, our social studies, and our SEL behavior data. So that's kind of how that will break down. And then in the mix of that, after the state report cards are released, which is November 17th, 19th, then at that December 4th meeting, that also will be on the agenda, as well as the building principals will help to share their goals and action plans, which you've seen a little bit of through our sale process, which changed a little bit this year. And one of our groups has already been at the cohort this last week, and we have the second group going. So you'll see how this all blends together really on this next slide. So when we look at our school continuous improvement framework, this is kind of a model or the process that we look at as well. And so we have that orange part of where are we now, and then also that green part of how did we get where we are. And so our teams have been busy. I think we shared with you that we had 100 staff members at the middle school in August, I think August 7th. who came together with their teams, and they really did this part of it. So they, looked at, a lot of times it's more of our student learning data, but in the process of doing that, there are those perception surveys that come in, and our SAIL team or our administrators, learning leaders did that as well. Tonight we'll share some of the demographic part of it, and then always the school processes falls in that as well, and looking at that as they're developing their goals and their action plans. So really when we look at that part of where are we now, we're looking at who we are, that's demographics. We're looking at those perceptions with our culture and climate, values and beliefs of how do we do business. We get into the student learning of our summative, our formative, our diagnostic, that's our local and our state assessment. And so that's how are our students doing. And then there's always the school processes with what are our processes. And you can kind of see what falls within that. I know that we talked with you the last time when we did talk about our 3D vision process, and we spent quite a bit of time digging into the root causes of why that's happening. And so in this case, they call it contributing causes, or kind of making some predictions and analyzing that. And so that's kind of the part of how did we get there. And so that's what we will focus on tonight. And then the next time in December 4th is where we'll get at those other questions of where do we want to be, how are we going to get where we want to be, and is what we're doing making a difference. And so I won't spend a lot of time on that until kind of as we wrap it up today. Just a little delay.
So then a lot of what we're going to be looking at tonight, as you know, is assessment data, because you've already probably had a chance to take a look at it, but I do want to explain a little bit about our assessment system and the assessments that we use in the district. So there's kind of 3 tiers of data that we look at in the district, and you can see that tier 1 is that biggest part of the tier, and that's going to be our classroom assessments. So that's assessment for and as learning. So if you look to the right, what is included in there within that balanced system, that is our formative assessments, that is our common formative assessments, and those are our end of unit summative assessments within the classroom. And it's the most important piece of data because it's what our teachers use day to day in the classroom to figure out are students learning what we just taught them. If they're not, how do we adjust our instruction or create groups that will address those with that missing learning. So that's that day to day, it's very important. Then there's a second tier of assessments, and you can see that's labeled as like screeners and benchmark assessments. So those are those things that we usually give like 3 times a year. Tells us if we have any high-risk students so that we can intervene right away, and that's why it's called a screener. It screens out those students that need a lot of support. So that's kind of that orange benchmark assessments on there. And then the final tier, which we'll also see tonight, is that state assessments for accountability. So it's assessment of learning. It's that end of everything assessment. It's kind of an assessment event because it's one day on that particular day with one assessment for that student. And that's that very top there. So those are the different assessments that we look at. We'll be looking at tier 2 and tier 3 assessments today.
So Lindsay, I just want to make sure I understand. So the word assessment, are you talking about the assignments that they do? I'll pick on the high school. So I have a high schooler right now. So the formative and summative you're talking about, that's where we get it from? Their weekly assignments, or is there something totally separate that they do?
No, formative assessments are the assessments that the teachers create aligned to their standards based on what they're currently teaching in the classroom. So like an exit ticket or maybe a quick quiz, like are they getting it? Something that's going to tell them right away, like, oh, they got a misconception, I need to research this to the class or to this group of students or whatever. That's what I mean by that.
Okay. So then based on this program, does that set the weighting of it? So I've always had the question, like, if I get this wrong, please correct. The formative always has less weighting on the overall grade than the summative, right? Do we get that from this program? Is that how we kind of set that? The criteria?
Yeah, I think I'm understanding your question. Like as a classroom teacher, your formative assessment, that's to determine if the student is learning so that you can do something for them. It's kind of like their practice, right? Those practice assignments that they do during class too. So you're not usually going to put that into the grade because you're trying to help them understand and then giving them that final assessment that says, okay, now we know if you've learned it and this is what your grade is.
Yep. No,
does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
You stated it much better than I did.
You can go to the next slide. So then just linked here is our district assessment calendar. So it's something that we have to update annually. And that encompasses all of the benchmark assessments and screeners and the state assessments. It tells you when it happens, how frequently, approximately in those date ranges, and that sort of thing. So that's available to the public.
So we are showing the template that we'll follow up with each section on. Sorry. So this template is what we'll follow up with each of the sections of the math, the science, and the 4Cs, and then we'll do the same. And so kind of after we share the data, we have taken a look at the strengths and the challenges and then what implications that it has. And so this is just showing that this is kind of the process after you see each of the pieces of data, the final part that each of our team members will talk about. So I'm going to start on the demographic data, and so it's kind of the who we are. This is actually a snapshot off of our report card, and it just gives kind of, when you look at the makeup in our district, you can see kind of our population in terms of our ethnic groups, and so obviously almost 90% of our students here in Pulaski are in the white area, but then you can also see that we have students in other groups or also identifying in 2 different races, so that's a part of this printout or this engagement on this. The other thing that I would point out is that, one of the last meetings we talked about open enrollment, and so it actually says that out of our students, our 3,798 students, that 6% would be open enrolled into the district. And then it also gives us our students with disabilities, so we're about 15%. Julie is finishing up with one of our new teacher sessions, which will be here. But we're a little bit higher than the state average, so that 15% is probably more the 12 or 13% range. And then our economically disadvantaged, which is based off of our free and reduced lunch, is 21%. Now, obviously our buildings may be different, so we have 2 schools that are Title I schools, and so they fall kind of in that upper 30% range, mid 30% range. And then Hillcrest is a little bit higher than this, so they could actually qualify for Title I. And middle school and high school, because they blend all of our students together, kind of are in those same ranges. But then Sunnyside and Illinois are actually under 20% in most cases. And then we do have an English language population, and that's about 1.5%. And so they're spread out through all of our buildings, and so our staff has to service students that take a different assessments, which we don't share the results on here, but it's called Access, and it gives us a level of where their English language proficiency is, and then that determines the services that we have. And so we do have students who do not speak any English at all, and just coming from a different country and need that support as well.
So before we move on, if Hillcrest could qualify, why are we not taking advantage of that, or is that a whole different meeting?
We don't get any extra money. You get the same pot of money. And the other thing that we've had conversations about it, so years ago, all of our buildings were targeted, which means that you could only target students with needs and provide them with services. And then if you were over 40%, you could be a school-wide, which means you could spread your resources across the building and service more than just a targeted group. Hillcrest was in that at one point, as well as Fairview and Glenbrook. And then they opened up the window, and we were right on that cusp link. I want to say Fairview was like 38, 39%, and Glenbrook was maybe 35%. But they opened up the window and said anybody could apply during this year to be school-wide. So we took advantage of it, and it really, like if you bought resources with Title I money, before if it was targeted, it could only be used with students who were on your needs list. School-wide opened it up like you could take any of those resources or any of those people, like your learning support teachers, and they could help anybody. And so it's a long application and process, as Fairview and Glenbrook could attest to. We probably spent 3-4 days with a committee from each of their buildings going through that process. So, and the other thing was we wanted to see if they would stay in. So Hillcrest used to be Title I, and then their numbers dropped for a couple of years, so then they fell out of it. And so I think we're on our 3rd year, right, that they could be. And so we wanted to see if that would fluctuate on us or not.
Okay.
Demographic data. So you can kind of see Our enrollment, this is our highest year in the last 5 years, so we only are showing 5, but I think usually in the annual meeting you get to see, you know, more of a trend of it. Obviously, the graph can be a little bit deceiving because it goes 0 up to 4,000, and you know, so not always a lot of differentiation, but we are at 3,827 students, so we continue to see an increase of that. All right. Some other demographic data on who we are. So here's our elementary schools, and I'm not going to dig into it because you can kind of see the trends of what's happening in each of those buildings with student numbers. So it kind of says that, you know, just by looking at it, whether they've been going up, they've been going down, or they've kind of been stable in terms of their student population. Here's middle school and high school. So pretty, you know, much in the same range throughout those years in both of those cases. We just broke it down so that if you wanted to kind of see specifically at each of the levels rather than an overall percentage of our ethnic groups, you can see how that falls based on elementary, middle, and high school. Obviously, we have two groups of other ethnic groups that we serve more so, with our Hispanic and American Indian would be our next two highest after our white students. Socioeconomic status, you can see where that falls in terms of our free and reduced and how they're identified that way. So obviously elementary is close to 400 students, middle school approaching 200, and high school just over 200. Here's also some data over 5 years showing our disability across our elementary schools. Do want you to remember that Glenbrook houses our ID program, an intellectual disability program, and then when you get to middle school and high school, because it's one building, that's where those are housed as well. And then at Lenoy, that would be where our early childhood, most of our early childhood. Now last year we didn't have a class out at Fairview as well, but this year everything right now is back at Lenoy as well. So it gives you an idea of, you know, the trends of what are happening with our special ed students in terms of our percent. Here's your high school and middle school. So generally you wouldn't see at high school numbers creeping up. I mean, but you're not dealing with a large percentage. So it's not like you jump from 12, 13% up into 20%, but you can see some fluctuation up of that, and middle school kind of has taken a drop from that 15% down to the 12. So when we look at our strengths and our challenges and implications, you know, we continue to, and I did point out in the one that EKEL was on there as well, so I think it was like 41 students the 1 year, and last year was 16 when that data was pulled. So we continue to offer that because it's an opportunity to keep students in our district that, you know, find that as a valuable way of learning rather than being in face-to-face instruction. And obviously it was more of a need probably during COVID, but it still serves a purpose and a need, so that we consider that a strength. You know, we continue to grow as a district, and highest enrollment was 20 occurred at the start of this year with our 24-25. And, you know, these referendum projects, which you had an opportunity to see here, you saw Hillcrest's last workshop meeting, and, you know, when we open up both of those buildings, you'll have an opportunity to see that as well, and it's just helping us to address space needs as well. Challenges, and I think you'll hear this as a very common thread through whether it's math, it's English language arts, or any of those. You know, we continue across the board based on even our demographics, based on our scores, that we believe professional learning communities is the way that we really focus on all students, and ensuring that all students means that we don't leave anybody behind, and that we're going to ensure high levels of learning. And that's a challenge, you know, based on different needs of students, different groups of students, but it's a challenge that we rise up to that occasion, and we really want to focus on meeting their needs. And then, you know, you heard about it when Dana had the memo about open enrollment. Obviously, opportunities that kids want to be here, want to join our district and take advantage of those opportunities. So we always explore those options for our own students of keeping them, as well as marketing for others. And then when we dig into implications regarding the demographics, I've already mentioned this a little bit, but you know, we really have to think about each of those subgroups and what we can do to meet their needs. So that's important for us. It's how do you close that achievement gap? How do you help those students grow and be where they need to be successful, to be college, career, and community ready. And then it's providing that professional development and that learning to our staff, not only with academics, but also with behavior, with social and emotional growth. We know when those things are taken care of, you know, just when you look at Maslow's hierarchy, you gotta take care of the basic needs before you can jump in and have kids learning. And so they have to come to school fed, or we have to feed them here, or, you know, we just have to meet their needs and do what it takes. And so that's definitely something that we focus on.
Okay, so we're going to dive into our first area of data, and we're starting with math. Jenny, can you thank you. The first exam that we'll look at the results for is the Wisconsin Board exam, which is our state test for our 3rd through 8th graders. They take it every spring. The math portion is taken every single school year, or at every grade level when the test is given. The board exam is designed to measure our students' proficiency within the Wisconsin academic standards. So in math, this is what we're expected to teach in Wisconsin in math at each grade level, and that's what we're measuring our students on in the spring. One thing I do want to note is typically when we brought this data to you, we've kind of shown you how our students have performed the year before compared to how they performed this year. In 2024, the state changed the cut scores for board exam as well as ACT and pre-ACT. So now the scores that we have this year aren't comparable because they're not using the same cuts. But next year, when we have 2 years of the same cut scores, we'll bring back that data and share that with you. But that's, I mean, they change the cut scores periodically. So we sometimes have years where we don't have comparable data.
Yeah, so talking about open enrollment, so if we have a student open enroll in, do we get their data from their previous district to put into the equation?
I mean, it doesn't go into the data that you're seeing tonight, because once you test the student and they reside with you for an academic year, then that's the data that gets locked in. So if the student transfers to us and then we test them this year, then that data becomes ours. We have access, and like their cumulative folder will come with their results so that we know kind of how they're performing.
Okay.
But it's not going to go into our equation unless we have a certain number of days with them here in our district.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this very first slide is kind of a summary slide of how our students have done from 3rd to 8th grade. So just so you know what you're looking at, when you look at that percentage on top, it's showing you the number of students who are meeting or advanced according to the standards at each grade level. One thing I do want to address is you can see that those bars change how long they are, and that's just reflective of how big that group of students is. So like, for example, our 6th graders is a larger class size than our 7th graders. It doesn't mean that anything about their achievement. The achievement is really that percentage that you see at the top. So, but I'm going to hand it off because Chris is going to continue to talk a little bit more about each grade level.
So on this slide, we're looking at our 3rd grade board exam data. This is district-wide, so it's all of our 3rd graders at all 5 elementary schools. What you'll see is that we have 71% of our students meeting or advanced on the math board exam for last year. This is the first time our students are taking this assessment. So they take it on 3rd, all the way up to 8th grade, and then I believe 10th with social studies.
Yes.
So here's your 3rd grade data. If we look at 4th grade, again, it's looking at all elementary schools. 58% of our 4th graders were meeting or advanced and fell into those categories. And for our 5th grade, we have 63% of our students. And like Lindsay said, we don't have that comparable data from last year because they changed those cut scores.
In terms of looking at the elementary level, you do have the ability to look at the assessments that are happening in the classroom throughout the year. Do you guys compare that to these forward results to see if it's consistent with what you're seeing in terms of students meeting or exceeding expectations?
I would say that it's a little different, right? Because we're seeing, you know, like in the classroom, we're able to do those formative and summative assessments, those common formative assessments to kind of see where our students are at that time. This is a snapshot we do one time a year. It really, there's a lot of factors that play into that, you know, depending on how the students are doing, you know, kind of that moment in time. So it's different to kind of compare. It's not apples to apples, it's kind of apples to oranges.
We also do have something that we look at each year. The state, or somebody in the state puts together a really great item analysis heat map where you're able to see, like, according to the questions on the test, which standards did our students do well in versus which standards they didn't. So we do kind of try and like consider what standards our students did really well in at 3rd grade, and then which ones are they struggling in, so that we can prepare our instruction for the following school years and say, like, okay, this is a standard that maybe we need to hit a little bit harder this year because our students struggle based on the assessment results. New group of students coming in, but you know, you want to use that data to inform you. They're taking the test, that's what it's there for. So we do try to do that, and then making sure that the rigor, like how difficult our assessments are aligned to what they're seeing on the board exam too, so that they're not walking into a test unprepared.
Some of the things we also see on that is that there might be only one question tied to a standard on the forward exam. So a student could literally just have that one snapshot or one question, or another standard could have 3 questions. But then the next year, now this standard has 3 questions and this standard only has 1 question or no questions on it. So there's inconsistency with that. So when we look at those heat maps, we're constantly looking for, okay, where are we struggling in, where do we want to close those gaps, but at the same time, where are we strong at, and how do we build on that?
And because Mark piggybacked, I want to piggyback on that too. But what I would share in regards to that is, even though they do change, what we do look at then is really looking at the types of questions. We may not know the specific question, but we have maybe the area and then the vocabulary that's used within the question, and then try to model our assessments at the classroom level to be closer aligned so kids are, you know, compare and contrast, if you know that's you know, a topic that is showing up a lot, like compare and contrast this set of data points and what does that mean, then we want to give our kids practice at doing that as well. So we try to, you know, make sure that we're assessing at the classroom level to set our kids up for as much success as possible.
So you guys get access to, I'm not going to say the exact exam, but you have access to the topics that are going to be on it?
There's a sample questions that do come out that
Okay.
then we practice, you know, like practice exam, kind of like they have the practice ACT and, you know, those kind of things. So the exact same thing exists. So many of our content teachers in the areas that we're testing will have, you know, they'll start class with some of those examples. They'll then use some of those same types of questions in their own assessments that they're doing within the units they're working on as well.
Yeah, and I'm not sure where Heidi was going with the question, but maybe the same place. So we have a child that doesn't do good on exams, but they're doing good in the classroom, or vice versa. It's that correlation piece to see if the exam is really showing the reality of where they're at, or they just did a really bad job, or they just click.
And I think that's where, in any of these assessments, we try to set, you know, the environment the best that it can be, because there certainly are kids. I mean, we educate all kids, and so we assess the vast majority. You know, there are some that based on maybe an IEP we don't, but you know, 98% of our kids we are assessing. And so, you know, if a smaller setting makes more sense, you know, we certainly set up the environment to match what we think will be the most helpful, to get the best results as possible.
Sure.
So obviously, we're talking about the forward exam, and there's several that we're going to go over. What is the timeline difference or the curriculum that we cover? And I know it varies because obviously teachers can adjust whether they're there. At what point is this exam given that they're supposed to be at that level? Like obviously, if you're a 3rd grader in spring, they're going to assume that they're at this point. But is this actually the skills they should have mastered December, or is this all the things they should have, you know, like where is that scale as far as this goes?
Part of it too is sometimes you have to move up what happens at the end of the year, earlier in the year, because it's assessed on the forward exam, and maybe your curriculum doesn't teach it until May, but this happens at the end of March or during April. And so those adjustments, you know, our teachers kind of get a grasp on that, but like Mark was saying, sometimes the standard didn't show up and they weren't assessing it, and then all of a sudden the next year it is being assessed. Going back also to the common formative assessment part, our common formative assessments really drive what our power standards are. And generally, our teachers, when they dig into this, so math, we just went through this process last year, you can't have 10 power standards and do them really, really well, because those are what you're guaranteeing the students are going to leave that grade level with mastered, that they're proficient in it. And so we really worked with our teachers this last year, like, you can't have 8 like you had the last time. You have to really pick the 3 or 4. And so then that spirals throughout the curriculum, and we continue to assess the kids on it, sprinkled with some of the other standards. And then a lot of our curriculum spirals as well. So you might get a concept in September, and then it might come back in November, and then, where before, usually you did multiplication, and then you moved on to something else, and now it was fractions, and then it was decimals, and so it's a little bit different than probably when we all went to school.
Do we feel at any time that the kids are being assessed on things that they haven't seen yet?
I think there are times that happens, and I look at math as being an area where, depending on the resource you're using, and that's where that heat map or the analysis piece comes into play. Our 7th grade did exactly what Jenny was saying. There was a lot of geometry standards being hit. Geometry, or stats and probability, those were typically at the end of the book. So then what do? Well, you want to expose the kids earlier to that. So you modify and not go page 1 through page 300. We might have to modify and adjust how we do that. So absolutely.
Do you feel that Origo, the math curriculum at elementary, meets what you're looking for, or what the state is looking for in the forward exams? Do you feel that everything is pretty well met there as far as teaching?
Our plan was to pilot resources this year, because we're on our 12th year now of being Origo Stepping Stones, and other districts have made some changes. So De Pere, who adopted the same year that we did, they made a change last year. When we really dug into it, we could not do it to our teachers. And with Act 20 and all of those requirements, we put a stop to it and just said, we're not going to pilot this year. We're hoping to do that next year and to dig into other resources and decide if it's time to make a switch. At the same time, Origo is coming up with a 3.0 version. And so, that will be in the mix as well. We surveyed our teachers who were on the committee when we were digging into the new math standards, and I would say half of them say that Origo meets the kids' needs and it has what it, and it depends on the grade level, and the other half will say that it's lacking in some things. But that's the case in any curriculum. You're not going to purchase one that covers everything that you need, and that's why then there is the supplemental when you need to have it or do it, and so we're on a holding pattern. But we continue to do professional development with our current program as well.
Did De Pere use that curriculum last year and now we have data for it, or are they using it this year and we don't have data yet?
This is their second year in illustrative math was what
So
they
that
went
the data we're seeing on here is them on.
So it would be, when they tested in April,
Yep.
they would have had 9 months with
And that's
that
De Pere
program.
Unified or West De Pere?
Yeah, De Pere Unified.
Okay.
West De Pere is illustrative math as well, though.
Okay.
So it's kind of been the math program that a lot of school districts are going with.
Okay.
Awesome. Then we'll transition to the middle school, and what you'll see on the next 3 slides are very similar to what Chris had said at the elementary. Different grade levels, varying from the high 50s, 59% in 6th grade, meeting or exceeding those expectations. In 7th grade, jumping up to 68%, and then in 8th grade, 78% meeting or being advanced related to the forward exam. So same kind of range that the elementary saw. When we were putting together this presentation, I was happy to see that I got the opportunity to talk about the next slide, and I think this might be, of all of them, the one that jumps out the most, because we really can't compare our scores from last year or the year before to you know, the current data that we're looking at. But what we can do is we can compare ourselves to our neighbors and the same grade level kids in those school districts and ours, because they took the same assessments that got recalibrated, you know, all of those kind of things. So we have the ability to do that. And on the left on that screen, what you'll see is we're in the middle in the blue, and we were in, when you look at our, you know, ourselves versus our conference comparables, we were in fourth position. On the right, you'll notice that we went from that, you know, 48% advanced and proficient or meeting up to 66%. And that transitioned us into third place. So kind of being a competitive person, and lots of us are too, that feels good. And it feels good for the right reasons. Our kids are doing well. Not where we want them to be, but we continue to want to grow, but they did a really nice job. I think the other piece to look at here is if you look at the state growth, so the state average went up, maybe by recalibration, maybe by learning, whatever that number is at 12%. Our neighbors, De Pere went up 16, Howard Suamico went up 14, West De Pere went up 15, and we went up 18. So if you look at it that way, comparing our students compared to the students in those top areas, the state average went up by 12, we went up by 18. De Pere 16, we were 18. Howard Suamico 14, we were 18. West De Pere was 15, we were 18. That's something we should celebrate. That feels good. And all of these districts are teaching to all of their students as well, but we exceeded the expectations of the state and how we compare to some of those most competitive districts too.
All right, we are moving on to some other assessment data. So we're going to be taking a look at FastBridge, which is our benchmark or screener that we used. This will be the last year that you're going to see FastBridge data from us. When the state moving forward with Act 20, they adopted Ames Web Plus as the screener that we're using, and so we're using that across all the way up to the 8th grade level for our students. So next year you'll see some different data, but last year we gave FastBridge, so that's the data that you're going to see today. It is a norm reference test. That means that when the student takes the test, it compares how other students at that grade level and age level performed nationally, and kind of just determines what level of risk that student has for not meeting end of the year benchmarks. So if they're at high risk, then they're at a high risk of not meeting those benchmarks. If they're at low risk, then they're likely to meet those learning goals. But they call it low risk because anything can happen. So even if a student's low risk in the fall, they may still not meet those benchmarks in the spring. So that's kind of what FastBridge does. That screener that helps us find those students that are at high risk.
And then as we look at each of the different grade levels in kindergarten and first grade, we use something called early math. The difference between early math and A math, which is what we use 2nd through 5th grade, is the early math is done one-on-one. So teachers pull those students individually. They go through the assessment with the students, where when we get to A math, 2nd through 5th grade, they can do those either in small group or their students can do them all at the same time. We do use the iPad to be able to do those assessments with our kiddos. So when we're looking at kindergarten, again, we're looking at district-wide, so these are all 5 elementary schools. And you can kind of see where they fell in the fall compared to the winter and then the spring. So if we're looking at kindergarten, they were 88% in the fall, 77 in the winter, 81 in the spring, when we're looking at those students in that low-risk category. And then you see the some risk and the high risk being the yellow and the red. We sometimes will see students kind of dip in the winter and come back up in the fall. What happens is FastBridge is an adaptive assessment. So what it is a student answers a question, they get it correct, the next question gets a little bit harder, they get it correct, it gets a little bit harder. If they get a question wrong, it kind of gets goes down, it gets a little bit easier, so they can kind of find where that student's skill set is at. And like Lindsay said, it's kind of been normed across the board.
So at what point, so we have other percentages of the kids that are low risk. When we get into some and high risk, is that where the different tier 2 and tier 3 comes into play?
Yeah.
And you would, okay.
Absolutely. So those were the kindergarten numbers. When we look at first grade, again, they do the early math, so this is done one-on-one with the students. You can see we went from 82% to 84 and stayed at 84 from the fall to winter to spring. In second grade, this one you see that there's now a blue part within the graph because what happens again once you get to that A math assessment is they add in an advanced category as well. So when we're looking at the top number, we had 84% of our students that was in the top 2 categories. So those would be the students that are either advanced or in the low risk category. So you can see how our second graders fell. Our third grade, I won't read those numbers to you. And then it goes to our fourth grade, and then our fifth grade.
And then as our students transition through our district, we continued up until this point with Fastbridge as well, so we had the longitudinal data to be looking at. In 6th grade, you'll see very consistent with results, as Chris had said, kind of going across. The big thing is you get kids that kind of move a little bit within the tiers, but Steve, your question about, that the yellow and the orange or red area, that does provide us, you've got the classroom, assessments that are driving some of those decisions related to interventions and needs at tier 2. This really helps us continue that to that possible tier 3 level to provide more time and support for our kids that are struggling. And so in 6th grade, you can see the numbers. The next slide shows 7th grade, just across the board, and then 8th grade as well.
Good evening, everyone. So for the high school math, we'll be talking about 3 different assessments. The first one is HMH, which is our screener. It's a local assessment. On that graph Lindsay showed, it's considered a tier 2 then. And this one, like Chris was saying about Fastbridge, is also adaptive. Go ahead, Colton. Thank you. Okay, so if we look at Colton, can you go back one, please? Yeah, thank you. So the way this is showing this current 10th graders, so this was last year's freshmen, and what?
I think Colton and Mrs. G are going back and forth on it.
Oh. G. Okay, so sorry, Colton. So our current 10th graders, last year's freshmen, what we see there, to the question before about, well, are we ever assessing kids and having, the fall is looking at where are you now, and then hopefully you see growth over the course of the year. So it's given 3 times, fall, winter, and spring. For our freshmen last year in math, we saw the kind of pattern we want to see, which is growth from fall to winter to continued growth into spring. We didn't see that in all 4 HMH assessments, which between this tonight's presentation and the next one we'll see. But 9th grade math did well. They grew, we saw that growth. Our current 11th graders, last year's 10th graders, we did see mild growth. You see that from fall to winter there was growth, and then a little regression from winter to spring. Overall growth, not the same kind of growth or level of growth we saw with the freshmen. And so as our 3D team meets in summer and sees this data, we have to develop hypotheses as to why this occurred, and then more importantly, what are we going to do about it? And that's part of what you'll see in the school improvement plan when we present those.
So Matt, question on the math, just because in the high school, right, the students have access to all these different levels of math, and do all students, it's obvious in the numbers, all students don't get the test, right? So how do you determine who takes the assessment and who doesn't?
It's based on which class they take.
Okay.
So some of those students that would be taking like essentially the junior level math, they wouldn't be taking this.
Okay.
They do, and then, so that's HMH, and then the other 2 are really that tier 3, which is the state assessments. And there at the high school, we've got pre-ACT secure for the freshmen and sophomores, and the ACT plus writing for the juniors. And so, kind of like Pat was saying with the chart for the FRCC there, you know, it's like, kind of like, what does that score mean? Is it good, is it bad? It's really all kind of contextual, and it's contextual based on where were the students the previous year, and how are our neighbors around us doing? How are kids in the state doing? And you look at that number and you kind of are able to make those comparisons and contrasts and have an idea of how our students perform. So with the pre-ACT math, you see that our students had 69.5 advanced and median, which is good to see. And now I do want to say for the pre-ACT, you're going to see a couple different scores. One is achievement and one is college readiness benchmark. So in my own words, the one is telling us where they're at the grade level. Okay, how did they achieve at their grade level standards? The other one is showing, based on how they did, what's the prediction of how well they're going to do in college. Okay, and so, I mean, if you go to the DPI website, there is a more elaborate description than what I just shared with you with my own words. I can read that to you if you'd like to hear that. Would you like to hear that?
I don't. Send me the link.
As you see these, just understand one is about their actual achievement, one is about a predictor of how they're going to do in the future at college, okay? Okay, so with that, we get into the ninth grade pre-ACT readiness level. What that's showing is that, 20% of the freshmen last year were already meeting the ACT benchmark, another 20% were meeting the pre-ACT benchmark, and then we had another 29% that were close to the target. So a lot of potential for future success there.
Matt, how do you think that these tests are perceived, knowing that 44% of our students go on to a four-year college? So how is this test perceived by our students when it has ACT in it, right? That's college ready, that's thinking 4 years. So how are your students perceiving when that test is given to them in your own words?
Okay, I'm just going to be transparent about that.
That's good.
So I think one of the challenges we have at the high school level is that in the spring, our students are given 2 standardized assessments. Okay, we've got the HMH, fall, winter, spring. Within a month, they're taking the state assessment. And so to ask students to do their best, to care about 2 assessments that have no impact on their grade and may not have any impact on their ability to pursue their post-secondary goals is challenging. It's really trying to explain to them why this matters, encouraging them to do their best, reaching out to families and asking for that support, our staff working with kids to encourage them to do their best, to involve them in goal setting. We also offered incentives. I think to answer your question fairly, it really depends on the student. I mean, some might do their best because they're intrinsically motivated. Some may do their best because it is a means to an end, perhaps entrance into an institution, perhaps a factor in consideration for a scholarship. Others might do it because of an external motivator like an incentive prize, and some really, we call dot racing, and we really encourage the students not to dot race, to give it their best. So I think it really does vary by student.
Thank you.
I would point out too that for 9th and 10th graders that maybe haven't made that choice if they're going to a 4-year school yet, it's a little bit harder to get them incentivized into putting forth maybe their best effort at all times.
Okay, so we'll pick up there. And we've got the 10th grade results. So these are our current juniors. So you see there, we had a little drop in the overall achievement down to 55.6%, advanced or median. Nice chunk there of 30% approaching. So, and then if we move on there to the benchmarks, the readiness, very similar, 30% actually meeting ACT benchmark there, another 11 meeting the pre-ACT, and then another 14% close to. So again, you could look at that and say there's a good chunk of our students that will be ready or showing readiness to be successful should they choose to go on to college.
So is there intervention at this point for that 45% based on these test scores?
Yes, we have a tier 2 intervention program where really the teachers, and really our math department does a great job of looking at the students' data on the local assessments, the ones they're using. Steve had asked the question before, the homework, the quizzes, those formative assessments, and then also the summative assessments, and looking at how are our kids doing, where are they struggling, and then working with them in those PLTs when they need that extra level of support. So yes.
Matt, do all students take this same test? So even the percentage of disabled students, maybe are non-English speakers, do they all take these tests?
Not all, it should be fewer than 1% that are taking the alternative assessment. And then our English learners, some of our English learners also take the access test, but they do take this as well. Okay, and then on to ACT, which is our current seniors, class of 2025, right? And if you look at their overall achievement, we had 58% that were advanced or meeting. And there again, you look at that, and what does that mean? Is that good? Is that bad? And when you see the next slide, looking at that in context, I think it gives a really good idea. And to Pat's point, you look at that data and, hey, this is a celebration. This is a pride point. Now, I think the important thing to know is that the students in 22-23 are a different class of students than the students who took the ACT in 23-24. But I mean, everything being relative there, hey, that's great news. In 2022-23, Pulaski High School ranked 4th in the FRC in math, and in 23-24, or this year, based on our results from last year, we're now ranked in 2nd, and that's great to see.
And then to go back and just kind of summarize math, where we're at, I'm going to highlight some of the strengths. Like Pat had mentioned with the Ford exam, we moved from that 4th to the 3rd place within the conference in our neighboring schools. We had 70% of our students that were either advanced or meeting on FastBridge in all grade levels except for 4th, which just fell right below that benchmark. Our 1st and 2nd grade FastBridge data was kind of showing that trend. We're in the fall to winter to spring. It continued to kind of move in an upward position, which is where we want all of our grade levels to go, rather than kind of seeing that dip maybe at mid-year or end of the year. Our 9th grade students across the board showed that their HMH testing, there was growth there in that 9th grade group. And then the composite for the math was increased in 11th grade by 1.2 points, which now moved them also to that 2nd place instead of 4th within the neighboring schools as well.
And then for the challenges, we definitely want to see that increase across the year in our HMH in both 9th and 10th grade. We want to see growth in the HMH and of course the pre-CT secure. And then also to see the 4th and 6th grade have growth that better matches the other grade levels achievement on the forward exam.
And then the last category on that slide is about implications. And what we're really looking for is 80% of our kids we want all of them, but statistically, you want 80% of your kids with the RTI pyramid to be at meeting or exceeding those standards. We're a little bit short on that yet, so that's something that we want to continue to grow on. And how does that happen? That happens through universal instruction, number one, that being the focus. What's happening day in and day out in classrooms and those things. So it's looking at mathematical practices, it's looking at making sure that we're solid on those power standards, how we're assessing those power standards, how we're meeting the other expectations as well. Then we also want to continue to work on our intervention piece, so AVMR training for our math teachers, who Michelle leads up, for our district and does a fantastic job in getting all of our teachers trained in that and then being able to utilize those strategies to help during those tier 2 or tier 3, as well as other resources. And then our math teams have gone through a book study called Building Thinking Classrooms. And it's really, there's about 14 different key pieces that can really drive instruction and more importantly drive learning within classrooms that trying to implement as many of those best strategies as possible to try to continue to have kids grow.
So the next area we're going to look at is science. And so our fourth grade this last year, we have 66% of our students meeting or advanced in the area of science. In our eighth grade,
Then you don't go, because that's me. In our eighth grade, we were at 65% meeting or being advanced. And then I was the lucky guy again, so if you look at the two different charts, I guess this is where it's nice to be able to compare a year ago, our conference to this current year, or last year's kiddos. We moved from having that 56 or 57% up to over 65. We transitioned from 5th place to 3rd place. That is something for us to celebrate. Similarly, I'll share that if you look at the numbers, the state percentage went up 0.6%. How did we compare to our neighbors? De Pere went down 3%. Howard Swamico went down 2.5%. West De Pere went up 9%, and Pulaski went up 9%. So I think that that's something else to really celebrate when we look at the top of those those histogram there, that chart there.
All right, talking about the science for the pre-ACT and ACT. Mr. Smith had pointed out that with the DPI, they have benchmarks for most of the subject areas. The one area they do not have those grade level benchmark areas for right now is the science area, but they use the ACT, basically college readiness standards for it. So in looking at this, it is looking at it as, will the student be ready for like an introductory college level course? So when you look at for the 9th graders, our indicators would show that 10% of our 9th graders would be predicted to get a B or higher in a college level course. 25% would be predicted to be successful at a college level course, so C level or higher, and then the other areas are looking for growth. And I know that number for needed intervention is a little bit larger, but historically with science not having that DPI state level, like grade level standard or benchmark, it looks that way in a lot of other districts as well.
Is there a specific area of science that gets tested?
Yeah, so the test is actually broken down. It is, for the pre-ACT, it's a 30-minute test. For science, 30 questions, so they get about a minute per question. It's actually, there's a lot of reading involved in it, so there's a lot of interpretation of data. That's about 40 to 50% of the test. Scientific investigation is about 20 to 30% of the test, and then the evaluation of models and inferences is about 25. So making educated guesses based on different models is about 25 to 35% of the test make up for it. And then when they do the actual ACT, it is 40 questions in 35 minutes. It is also the last test that students take. It's a 2.5-hour test for the 9th graders and 10th graders. So sometimes fatigue can kind of set in at that point as well, especially at that ACT level where it's a 3.5-hour test that they're taking. So jumping then back into for the 10th graders, there should be growth. Obviously a different class being tested than what the 9th graders were. But as you can see, 36% of them, so 19% are predicted at that point to be successful at a college entry level course. B or higher is the prediction, 17, and then that 50%. And then when you look at the 11th graders on the ACT, they do have that DPI benchmark for it, and that's what our statistics show in here. So it's showing that 50% of our students are at or above grade level for the ACT indicator.
Is there like a normal spread that you guys shoot for? Right, back to Pat's comment, 80% is the pyramid, right? So when we look at the high, if the high is 80%, what do you guys shoot for on the low end? And again, I'm not saying you're shooting for a number, but you know what I mean? So sometimes it's like 20, 80, 20. Is there like a balance that you guys target?
I mean, you really want it to be like
80, 15, 5
yeah.
at the
Okay.
most. That's like usually how the pyramid is set up when you look at like the RTA pyramid. So 80% at that tier 1 level, and then 15 at receiving tier 2, and then 5 at tier 3. Keeping in mind that the 5% is receiving core instruction, tier 2 instruction, and tier 3 instruction, which is what's supposed to help them catch up multiple grade levels within a year. So that's kind of the model.
Okay, thank you.
I would say one thing is, a lot of times our people want to jump right to the intervention part of it. And we used to have a student service director that always reminded us that you really have to take care of the universal before you can be going off into the tier 2 and tier 3. At the same time, we all want to service those kids as well. But you really have to take care of what you're doing for all students first and get to that 80, 85%. But 80 is kind of that, where you want to be.
Yeah, I'm just curious, so if you look at, I think it's back a slide, I don't know, yeah. So as the 27% move up, do you normally see the 22% shrink? Or is it, I guess it's year by year is slightly different, right?
And I would also say one of the things that, with good data is that tier 2 number, it kind of varies, because what one of the strengths of Ames Web that we're using is we're really getting into, you can have kids that are green being a good number or a good response on different topics, and then it's this component that's really low that's bringing it down, like vocabulary. So then you can really zero in on that, get that kind of squared away and get them out. It's a very fluid process. It's not like you're caught there and then you're out and you're always out. Well, no, you might slide back in, and then so right. I think, it varies from unit to unit.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And then looking at our comparable data in 23-24, currently ranked in 4th. De Pere was at a 22.5. Howard Swamico was at a 21.5. West Pier was at a 21.8, and then we were at a 20.7. So we're all within, the average would be about 2 question difference on the score of that test when you average that out.
So then we look at our strengths challenges and those implications, looking at the strengths specifically. We improved in science in the forward exam, moving from 5th to 3rd in the FRCC, which is huge, based on the science achievement. We moved from 5th to 4th in the FRCC and ACT science achievement this year. And then 11th grade ACT composite on science increased by 1.1 points from last year.
Some of the challenges, we want to improve obviously the science achievement at the 9th and 10th grade on pre-ACT Secure. Get more buy-in from students at that level as well. Science standards seek to balance application of science with the content of the science as well. And then we're also working on, since it is a reading-heavy test as well, incorporating more vocabulary into curriculum, incorporating more nonfiction reading into curriculum as well, just to build that stamina and nonfiction reading.
And then implications, we wanted to share 3 different ones, one at each level. As you'll see, number 1, we did a complete retraining with our 9th through 12th grade science teachers on universal core instruction with the resource that they adopted a few years back, and then how to utilize those supports for different differentiation opportunities. Back to that vocabulary thing, I'm now yellow. In the midst
right
of
back
all that, with everything else going on at the elementary level with literacy, we also are in the midst of transitioning to new science kits. As you can see, 1st and 5th grade adopted 2 new ones, 2nd through 4th, 1 new one. It'll take a little bit more time to get that, fully in full motion. And then we did the same as the high school with a retraining and review of our resource that we adopted a few years ago called iQuest. Again, really focusing all 3 of those things on universal instruction for our kids.
And then our last portion of data that we have tonight is on the 4 C's. So the 4 C's is the use of technology for students to consume content, collaborate, create, show what they know, and critically think. And so there is no standardized assessment for the 4 C's because the idea is that the integration of technology happens in all content areas and deepens the learning experience in all those areas. But as a district, we value our assessment data as a whole, and we want to know more specifically about our 4 C's. And so we've created our own self-assessment. We give that assessment to all students in grades 3 through 12. Previously, we used to use a Bright Bites assessment for this, and it was pretty extensive, and we didn't need that many questions on that many topics, and so we were able to pull the questions that pertain to our students and then also add some of our own questions about digital citizenship and other things that we have been working on. So the data that you're going to see to follow is from May of last spring.
So our first one up is consuming content for grades 3 through 5. We're really looking at exposing our students to a variety of those digital tools while also maintaining that balance between everything being tech and everything being in print as well. So we've got things like H&H, looking at curriculum. We've got Epic that gets used, things like TrueFlix. We've got some classrooms that do utilize podcasts. You'll see that that's a little bit on the lower side. And then we've also got like ebooks and docs as well. But you can see that there's definitely a different variety, which is what our goal is for 3 through 5.
Same thing, pointing out the highlights from 6 through 12. It's important to see that the students are getting a variety of different technologies. There is one area for growth, and that is, again, that listening to podcasts and audio recordings. But overall, students are being exposed to technology in a variety of different ways.
Next up is collaborating digitally. I would say when we kind of meet, this is one of those areas that we want to make sure that we stay focused on as well. This is really just that working together and using different forms of technology to do so. So this could be like using Google Meets, working together through Google Slides or Docs as well. Again, definitely 3 through 5, we want exposure to that. Collaboration is definitely one of those lifelong learning skills. We want to make sure that we continue to find new and innovative ways to be able to do that.
At the 6-12 level, on the right side of that slide, we want to celebrate the increase of the digital collaboration that occurs for our kiddos. Another data point that we want to share is the opportunity to celebrate outside of the classroom with other experts. We don't expect that to happen all the time because we obviously have resources that we're using universally, but having the opportunity to bring in experts virtually through, in the field that maybe they're studying or expert experiences, certainly make some relevance there happen, especially, at that 6-12 level.
Next up, we have the creation portion of that. You want to talk about variety? I mean, for grades 3 through 5, when I see this 14 years ago when I came here, iPads were just being introduced into our classrooms. We were lucky if we had 1 or 2 per classroom, and I look at all the things that our students are doing now and really kind of keeping up with it as well. Definitely, again, using a variety. This is really about how to show their learning through those digital products and tech tools. Everything from videos to making their own podcasts. There's drawing apps, there's docs, graphs, charts, slides, ebooks, posters. Years ago, one of the things that we looked at with our students and how they were reporting, I think Amy's going to talk a little bit about it on the next slide, but it's just having our students understand the vocabulary. So for example, they would be working in one of the apps, and then they would report out that, yeah, they don't know about making digital posters. And like teachers would have to remind them, hey, this is the app for digital posters. So it's increasing their technology vocabulary while we're also working within these apps.
And then at the 6-12 level, with the information there, I think the takeaway there is our students are creating a lot of, showcasing their learning through lots of different mediums. And I think that that's really important to highlight. We have a great LMS, DLS team that they focus goals, last year's building goals around the ability to do that. They worked on that consistent language and then aligning different tech apps to the instruction in the universal curriculum to help do those things. So it's building those relationships, and then the comfortability of our core teachers or specialist teachers to be able to utilize these different medias to help kids show those learnings. So lots of different opportunities there.
So what we want to see here is we want to see a balance. So we want to make sure that students are showing what they know through a variety of tools, and those are all along the bottom. So we're happy to see a balance here. But when the LMS team looked at this data, and they, for example, if you look at podcasts, they're low. And they'd be like, well, I did this with kindergarten, we did this in third grade. So they kind of reflected and said, vocabulary is kind of the barrier, that if we're not saying it's a podcast, the students aren't answering that they're creating podcasts. And so on the next slide, they, as a team, created common vocabulary that we now use K-12 and share with students that for a video, these are the apps that you use and this is what a video means. And so they're just using that common language.
Just a question. So I know we use Google, right, for most of our stuff. Do we expose our students at all to any of the Microsoft stuff and to, you know, the iPads versus a computer, like a laptop, so they get exposure to all of that?
In the business department in the high school in particular, they use the Microsoft offices.
Okay.
And our kids can get a certificate through the DPI. So that is, we just have to add one more component, Microsoft Outlook.
Okay.
And then we'll take care of that. They can get some of it, but once we get that component added in, they'll get the full certificate through the DPI.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Our last C is the critical thinking component of that. And this is really just how to use technology to be able to solve some of their own problems. So, I mean, this could be everything from reading online, something that has been popular as of late for our students. Sometimes what they do outside of school is they love to go to YouTube and find out how to solve things on YouTube. We also do one of the things that are at the elementary level that we use quite a bit that our students really love, and we've talked about it before, those breakout EDUs. They get a chance to work together collaboratively and as a team as well to solve different clues throughout the EDU project, and that's all based on our curriculum.
Yeah, so really students in 612, also 90% of them are showing that they're getting autonomy in the choices that they're making through the technologies as well.
And then the last thing we wanted to share is because we create our own assessment, like I said earlier, it gives us the opportunity to ask other questions that we care about as a district. And so I wanted you to know that it's more than just the 4 Cs. And so these are just 5 highlights of the data that came from that. Is our students believe that technology enhances their learning. That chart on the top right column shows that 90% of the students feel like, yes, it is a benefit how they use technology in the classroom. Students identified that they have a lot of choice in how they show what they know, that they're really knowledgeable about how to act and react when faced with difficult challenges online. So that's part of our digital citizenship curriculum. We've been working really hard on engagement last year and this year as a district, and so we asked a question about their engagement in the classroom, and then when we compared it to the national data, our students say and show that they are more engaged than other students in the nation, and then finally that students see their iPad as a value to their learning, and that's the bottom chart.
I would just add on that, Curtis alluded to 14 years ago when we looked at iPads. Amy and I took a lot of grief, and I still remember being at the high school and getting drilled during their lunch hour by the kids because they really wanted a MacBook or a Google Chromebook. And when we made this decision, it was about authentic learning and creation. It really came down to that. And I had kids at that level, and I got drilled by my own kids. And finally, when my boys were seniors, they said to me, we kind of get why you did this. And now they're 23-year-olds, and my son straps his iPad onto his knee every day when he's flying because it's the weather patterns, it's all of that type of stuff that he needs to have his information. My other one uses it in landscaping and drawing up his plans, marketing with my daughter. And now they come back and they say, we get it. We understand why it was the iPad.
Now I just have to share another story. Thanks, Faye. When we were having some sub shortages, and I was subbing in AP Physics at the high school, and the students were doing a group project, and what they had to do is they were doing some experiment where they had to test and count how many oscillations were happening with this really rapid piece of equipment. I'm not a physics teacher. And then they had to graph it, and they had to create a hypothesis about it, and then they had to all work on it together. And so it was amazing to me that they couldn't count these fast enough. So on their own, they recorded using their iPad. They put their recording in slow-mo so that they could count it. They took a picture, they threw it in a notability. Then they shared that out with their group where they all started writing hypothesis notes. And it was at that moment that I was like, this is exactly why I said we did. And then today I had a teacher who came from the Green Bay School District And when I was in his classroom, he said to me, he came from a Chromebook district, and he's like, I finally get it. I finally get how advantageous the iPad was, and he gave me a bunch of examples. And so that's just a debate that happens in our area. There's always a lot of conversation on what device is best for learning. And I'm really happy that the choice that we made many years ago after piloting many options is really coming to impact learning.
Sorry. That's still on the trigger.
So again, we wrapped up with strengths and challenges and further implications. You see that the goals were met at high levels. Just heard a few stories about that as well. Just the variety, and that's like for me in elementary, that's really exciting to see that our kids are getting exposed to what they like the best. They get choice in that, but that it's not just one size fits all. So really capitalizing on that as well. There's a big celebration there in strength is that 88% of our staff participating in at least 6 hours of that Apple Core as well. And then our DLS and DMS and the tech support that we have has always been just absolutely top notch and continues to do so. And it's really tough because there's constant updates going on. The job that Amy and her team did this summer to get all of our iPads into our kids' hands was, it was nothing short of a miracle. So, they deserve so much credit because they understand how important technology is for us and to be able to hit the ground running on those first few weeks that our kids are back in school as well. So, and then administrators, we're modeling the use of technology as much as we can as well. And there's certainly aspects of our job that it's a lot easier, whether it's a cell phone in your pocket or your iPad to take photos and send some things in real time.
Some of the different challenges, there used to be specific 4Cs goals, now they're embedded into the building goals. Curriculum changes a lot as well, and keeping technology consistent with that. The constant changes and upgrading technology tools, making sure that finding and expanding toolboxes so that we're deepening learning experiences, and then integrating 4Cs into math and literacy goals as well.
And then district-wide, the implications, really that first bullet goes back to the slide before that Amy shared about the data from the students and what they said was helpful for them. So based on that, we need to continue to collaborate with our staff how to embed the technology where it impacts learning and can help our students. So that is just key. And the second bullet really follows the same suit. It's just more specifically with our adoption of the HMH piece is utilizing it within that curricular area to help with the universal and any intervention pieces too.
So we did want to end on celebrations. Overall on all of ours, we kind of collaborated to come up with these, but our enrollment continues to increase, and we're getting closer on closing that gap between open enrollment and of kids coming in and kids going out. And obviously, we'd love to have that exceed because that is also money in the school district's pocket as well to service kids. Our virtual learning is an option for kids who need that, and so it's something we'll continue to offer as long as kids show that that's a need that they have. You've heard it over and over, that really it starts with our universal core instruction, and when we get that right and we guarantee that viable curriculum for all students, and we can do it at high levels, then you really can turn your attention to the tier 2 and tier 3 and what you're going to do to support those students. Our student-centered coaching, you heard that report from them last year, has been really impactful, and our new people would say that they're in business quite a bit, and people are coming to them, teams are coming to them, to the point that they almost don't have enough time to meet the needs of all of our teachers, and so we continue to strive and work with that as well. We're always using data and that evidence to drive what we do. It's a continuous improvement process. We don't arrive, we keep growing and learning, and so we need to keep doing that. You've heard the use of EduClimber, we're getting more proficient with that and using it more to really dig in to the data, and the teachers are as well, so that it's at their fingertips. It's not something that they have to be sorting through and figuring out. And then just professional development. our new teachers that we have that have taught in other districts have commented to us that they did not get this type of professional development in their other districts. And so across the board, whether it's Apple Core, it's the self-directed PD with them getting to pick what they want to learn, or our thinking classrooms with the built-in thinking classrooms, vertical learning. You saw some of that as you probably walked around here today with the vertical whiteboards. That's happening in elementary all the way up through high school. Our AVMR, which is more of a tier 2 support and tier 3, and just supporting our people in lots of other tools and ways that they can impact students and their learning. And so we had started off sharing this, and next time we still will be in that part of where are we now and how did we get here. But know that in December when we come back, this is where we'll really get to where do we want to be and how are we going to get there. And so when you dig into that, it gets even beyond your mission and your vision and your purpose, but really gets into those student learning standards as well. So where do we want to go? And then, when you look at that continuous improvement plan, and in our case, it has all of these components. It's those strategies, it's activities, it's resources, it's the evidence, the measurement of knowing that you have reached that, and that's kind of the evaluation of it well, and that's one thing that we know, that this is continuous improvement, and it takes a team in order to do that and make sure that we're ensuring high levels of learning for all students, which this kind of lays out. Maybe it died. There it is. So like we said, next time will be English, language arts, social studies, and SEL. And then we'll also take a look at our state report cards and also our building goals and action plans, the first. And then we are working on our second 100-day plans. Like I said, half of our team was down in West Dallas on Friday, and the other half will go on November 19th to Wisconsin Dells. And so we've started to put together, based on our data, our second 100-day plan, and then we'll go back in March and we'll work on our third 100-day plans. As well as that happening here, our building principals and associate principals are also starting to bring back their teams, their guiding coalitions, and their teachers on their parts of what happens within the district as well, or their plans in their building. So I know you asked questions along the way, but you might have some other questions that this team and our other principals here can also help answer.
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to thank you for the presentation, and I love where we're going. Thank you.
So a lot of great things have changed going in from, last year, close to the end of the year to this year. So curriculum changes. You guys, how you're doing your goals this year has changed. Behavior goals have changed. I mean, a lot of really positive things in my opinion. Can you just name one thing that you're doing differently this year compared to last year that you know is going to make a positive impact? And it can be for your team, like staff or students or both. I just kind of want to hear, just get motivated with all the positivity here at the end.
I'll go first. And we really took it from Sale, and I think when Brooke and I met with our staff as we were setting up these 100-day plans, it's really that focus of find one thing. We have such overachievers that they want to do this and this and this and this, and you lose track of kind of where you're at. And we actually have heard that through our coalition from our teachers regarding the 100-day plan, that it seems like it's at the forefront more often, it's talked about more often, it's focused on more often. It's that one thing that we are going to do that's going to be impactful in moving our students forward.
I would say, Lindsay and I had this conversation because we would try all different ways of getting at root cause when we would plan our hour with the 100 people. And it never took. We tried the fun way of why Aaron Rodgers should stay or go or whatever it was. And then we tried, the serious one, and it never took. And then suddenly we go to Sale, and they do this 5 whys, and you spend some time on it. And I really feel like our staff started to really look at why is this happening, and getting at that root cause of continuously asking that question and drilling down. And then they're like, okay, if that's the why, now what are we going to do about it, and how are we going to take care of it? So I think that's been a major change that I've seen.
For Hillcrest, I would say with having a district goal focused on behavior, I think we as a staff really kind of took that to heart of how do we continue to look at how we're doing things systematically and being consistent across the board. So just, one example is we're collecting data. When we look at the number of referrals we had in the first 2 months of this year compared to last year, it's cut in half. So I mean, we're not perfect. We have still room to improve and room to grow, but that's one, I think, strength that we've seen, is just kind of being consistent with those expectations across the board.
And I think the behaviors too, I mean, seeing that cut in half, now they're ready to focus, right, and learn. So I see that obviously impacting.
And I would piggyback off of what Chris said, the intentionality that we spend with staff being vulnerable to what are our big hurdles, what are our struggles, and then really laying it out and working together collaboratively to work on that, refocusing everything we do, our structure, our strategies, our processes, our routines, and it's made a huge difference. And we've seen it, I think our staff have seen it, and we want to keep building on that.
I would agree with everything they said, so I'll go a different angle on it. I think that people can feel the consistency elementary, middle to high school of going in the right direction. And when we started the PLC process, there was more comments about, well, we've been doing this for years. And I think, not that we've done anything different other than continuing to improve, like Jenny had said, as far as, the process to get the right work getting done, the way of going about doing it maybe has changed. But I think that there's a feel of the ship in the direction that it's going being the right way. And when you have that, and then you can keep teams working together, and sometimes you have to change up your teams and your content area in your houses or what have you, your grade levels. But you get that momentum going and they see then the positive, like when we can share some of that school report card stuff, that's gonna be pretty powerful for everyone in this room and everyone sitting in our buildings, I think. And they'll see that it's working. And I think that it's not something different, but I think it's staying the course and it's getting there. And I think that'll be huge.
Just kind of a prelude into the school improvement plans, but I think some of the things that are different at the high school this year, first and foremost, we put a focus on making learning targets visible in all classrooms, and we've collected evidence of how that looks in different classrooms, and people know that that's an expectation and they're doing it. And so that's really good to see. We have more work to do with those learning targets, and there's more to that than just making them visible, but that as a necessary step. I think in terms of like some of that survey data, in terms of behavior and those kinds of issues at the high school, there are some things like we brought in Smart Pass, which the middle school is using, and it was really to eliminate the announcements that were going on at just, there would be sometimes some pretty important meetings and things, and you have to pause because people were calling down. So we brought that in to eliminate that. But when we had our summer meeting with our Big Rocks meeting with our staff, they talked about, well, no, let's turn this on they said, okay, we don't want to force this on staff and make this one more thing, but if you're saying, hey, you want this, let's present it to the staff and put it to a vote. And it was like over 90% that wanted that on, and so that's been implemented. It's on. We've got much fewer students in the hallway when they shouldn't be in the hallway. Those announcements if you come into the high school, you shouldn't hear them. They're very rare now, so that was a very positive thing. And I think the way, with the new team, the way we're addressing both attendance and behavior has been very positive. I mean, Mr. Ganzen is doing a great job with attendance and getting on those attendance issues right out of the gate, and so we're in a much better place this year. And then in terms of like dealing with the referrals, Mrs. Thompson is not doing attendance, but she is dealing primarily with those referrals. And so there's just natural consistency with how those are being addressed. So I think those are all very positive things that are happening this year.
I mean, I don't think this will be a surprise to anyone. I'm really excited about how proficient and how much data our teams are using. And through EduClimber, using that both for academic data and for our behavioral data. We're all on EduClimber with our writing of our referrals, and it has been so helpful when we get to teams to be able to drill down and figure out what's really going on with the student, get to that root cause so that we can help them. So that's why I'm excited about it.
Sure, I can add. Thinking about students with disabilities and the fact that, we talk about the 80% and we want all students to be proficient or advanced at that level. In reality, we have more than 80% of our students that we have to reach, and the lift for some of our students with disabilities is very high. So when we talk about one of our goals in reading and math and building those skills to be able to lift by 1.5 years to 2 years growth, a huge focus in our work this year is really keyed in on what interventions are really targeting those specific skill needs that kids need to work on. And we are really making some nice progress in that area. So we have very intentional, focused, scientific research-based interventions in action at all of our buildings right now, and it's super cool to hear about the progress that the kids are making with those. So that's one thing, and then to see in action the result of Behavior Solutions, the workshop that we did this summer, in the buildings, to see and hear the language that the staff are using as a result of that. And we got to continue with that work, of course, but really targeting those two things in our goals and being very intentional about accelerated growth for all of our students who need it.
Thank you, everybody. That was great.
Any other questions from the board? All right, thank you all for all your work on that. I appreciate it. We'll now move into our second citizens forum if anybody would like to speak. All right, next business meeting will be November 20th, back at the district office, looking at school calendars, local and state assessment data, so more data. Along these same lines, a couple new course proposals, and then some policy work. Just need a motion.
I'll move to adjourn.
A second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. Have a good night, everybody.